We're back. Cue the epic music. In the first 100 days in 1.18 hardcore, somehow this lowly builder survived. Exploring caves, destroying blazes, and not having enough Eyes of Ender for the end portal. In the next 100 days, we make a mob farm, we exploit and kidnap the local population, and of course, we attempt to harness the power of flight. So here's what happened on our journey to 200 days of survival in hardcore Minecraft. What, 1.18, like the one with the big caves and the cliffs and all the skill. We kicked off day 101 by chopping some trees, nothing particularly exciting. However, I did enjoy it that much that for day 102 I decided to do the same thing. We were going to need a lot of wood in the coming days after all. The next day we took Dave for a morning ride to go down to the local village where we exploited them for mending books and levels. This obviously led to more tree chopping over the coming days. We did lots of trading, we got a bunch of mending books, and by the time we were done we had over 30 levels. So I sold my last batch of sticks and then I headed to the mines to get more diamonds. On day 107 we mined all day and then we headed home as the sun fell and we went to bed. The next day I did some enchanting, I applied some mending, but it got to a point where I was struggling for XP, which meant it was time for a mob farm. My worst nightmare. Go away, don't kill me. At least all my stuff's going to go into the... So at least all my stuff's going to get picked up by the system. Oh, what? I have to get out of here before anything starts spawning on me and blowing everything up. See, look, I told you we'd fix it. Easy. Oh, God. I have one rule, don't get in the mob farm. The next day, with everything crafted and gathered for the mob farm, we set off in search of open ocean. We found a spot not too far from our village and started to pillar up. I got 128 blocks up and as the sun went down, I realised I'd forgotten my water bucket, so I just went to bed. In the morning, I once again pillared up 128 blocks of gravel, this time with water, and I then placed a lava bucket on top of a floating cobble block. I waited for the lava to reach the bottom, picked it back up, and then I placed a bucket of water. This created a hollow cobblestone column. That's really difficult to say, by the way, that was like the 5th attempt. I went to the bottom, made a hole, placed some soul sand, and then I collapsed down the gravel tower, which was hugely satisfying. Next up, I was going to need some ice. Conveniently, I knew just where to find some. On the way there, however, I did come across a cool-looking shipwreck on the land, so I quickly looted that without fear of drowning, grabbed the buried treasure map, and then grabbed some loot. It was okay. A short while later, I could see the ice spikes biome on the horizon, and when I got there, I just hacked into a lake and collected a bunch of ice. Next morning, I figured while I was here, I might as well grab some packed ice as well, so I quickly took down one of those columns, and then set off home. As the day was drawing to a close, the weather turned, but eventually I could see my mob farm looming out of the distance. We were almost there. Upon arriving, I columned up with the ice and got all the way to the top. I then started to destroy it so that I could turn it into a water column, but promptly realised I was not going to have enough air for this, so I swam back to the top, got some air, and thought about the situation. I then remembered a technique I'd seen previously where placing torches can create an air pocket. So I went down a couple of blocks, tested it out, and it seemed to work. This was the way I was going to do it. So I worked my way down the column, destroying ice and using the torch spam trick to make sure I didn't drown. When I got to the bottom, I tested the elevator, and I kind of got stuck after a few blocks. It turns out that placing the torches actually removes the water source block. So we were back to square one, really. This meant I had to collect lots and lots of kelp and put this in, doing it the old-fashioned way. I could still do the torch spam trick because then placing a piece of kelp would turn it into a water source block. I could have just done this in the first place and saved myself 2 days getting ice. With the bubble vator finally installed, I could build a platform and move my bed and chests up to the top. This enabled me to start work on the mob kill chamber, and then I pillared up to where the first mob spawning platform would be. By day 115, we'd reached the top and we were ready to start installing platforms. I was running a bit low on deep slate, so I headed home to stock up, and while I was there, I made a whole bunch of hoppers, because we were going to need some for the kill chamber. The next day, I went back to the mob farm, put in the hoppers, and we were ready to start on the water catchment platform. This is what was going to sweep them all into the middle and down into the kill chamber at the bottom. At this stage, I realised I'd also forgotten the observers, so we once again went back to our house, grabbed some observers, and then headed back to the mob farm, finished off the platform, and we placed ice to actually get all the water streams in. With this in place, we were ready to start building our mob spawning platforms, which took a couple of days, but by day 120, we were ready to install our roof. Now, usually this roof would come out 14 blocks from the center, but because the mob spawning rules have changed, I've done it at 21, and this should be enough to make it dark in the center. I then added a redstone clock on the top, which is what was going to wash the platforms, and then tested it out. We had pistons at the back of the kill chamber, so any mobs that got stuck, we could press the button and it would push them towards us. However, the rates were really not very good. There was an issue, and that issue was spiders. To solve this issue, I set off to go get myself some magma blocks, and while I was there, we ran into a bit of a problem. A trident boy was floating around in the water, so I jumped out, I equipped my shield, and dove straight back in to deal with the problem. This is the first trident round I'd seen, and much to my surprise, he actually dropped a trident, so I was extremely pleased with this. As you can tell by the way I started jumping at the camera. On day 122, we did what we said we would never do. We got into the mob farm. I did actually turn it off beforehand this time though. We then placed magma blocks around the top of the hole so that if anything was stuck on the edge, it would at least eventually die and not clog everything up. I then had a little peek into the kill chamber because it looked like it had been building up quite a bit, and I wanted to make sure that the spiders weren't climbing up the tube. This didn't turn out to be the best idea. I then decided to rebuild the kill chamber without the pistons, mainly because they no longer existed. This meant I could go the full 360 degrees around the chamber and kill everything as required. I then just launched myself into the sea because it was time to head home once again to go grab our enchanting setup. I then created a new platform at the mob farm, put down all the bookshelves and the enchanting table, and got to leveling up. For the next few days, we killed all the mobs, got all the XP, and we managed to get some better enchants on our armor and tools. I did, however, still need to repair my tools, so we carried on killing for a little bit longer. On day 128, I realised it was probably about time to get a nether portal set up. I was fed up of going such a long distance to and from the mob farm. However, once I'd built the portal, I had actually forgotten my flint and steel because, well, I've got a memory like a fish apparently. So I went home back to the overworld, and while I was there I figured I should probably just head back to the mob farm and put the portal up here. I'm sure it comes as no surprise I only had 2 pieces of obsidian on me, so I went back down into my mines, gathered more obsidian and finished off that portal. Once I lit it, I didn't go through it however, because I wanted to ensure it definitely linked to our one in the nether. This meant I had to ride back home again. We went into the nether, lit the portal, jumped through, and thankfully it did actually link up where we wanted it to. This was going to make our life a lot easier. After a stressful time building the mob farm, I just needed to chill out and chop some wood again because, well, we'd used quite a lot of our wood and we were going to need even more to be able to build our minecart rail down to the village. So we chopped for a couple of days, and on day 132, we were finally ready to start on making our minecart bridge look good. I played around with a few designs I didn't really like too much. I removed some fences, added some fences, and in the end, I settled on trapdoors for the railings, and it was starting to come together, but it still needed a bit more detail. I primarily used fence posts to create the stands for the bridges, and then I added some lights to give it a bit more detail, and when I stood back and looked at it, it was definitely looking a lot better. I spent the next couple of days finishing off this bridge using the strip logs, the spruce planks, and of course trapdoors, and dealing with some of the local creepers that were creeping around my bridge. I then did a couple of passes on the bridge, adding some details, getting the rest of the trapdoors in, and making some alterations to the actual stands to make them a little bit girthier. And by the end of it, it was looking pretty good. On day 135, we made a start on the tunnel, and that was what was actually going to lead us back to where we were going to be putting the station in. On day 137, we were still finishing off the tunnel, but with that eventually done, we could start prepping the land for the station. On day 138, we started building the station itself, we got a bit of a platform in, we started building a floor, and then I got to work on the stairs. On day 140, however, I found an enderman in my base, so I promptly trapped him in a boat, gave him a little taste of my sword, and he dropped an ender pearl, which was good. We still needed another 3 to actually finish opening the end portal. By the end of the day, it was raining, dark and horrible, and I got to work putting up some walls on my station. Next day, however, I realised I didn't really like the stone, so I completely removed it and replaced it with mushroom blocks. I then got to work on the roof. I went with just a basic slanted roof for the side of the platform, and I was going to go for a slightly pointier roof on the middle. This meant that I would need to build up another floor, so I came up with a fairly simple design, just continuing to use the dark oak logs, the mushrooms, and then I used black stone for the roof because I wanted it to match my main house. On day 142, we had some early visitors to the station, but we weren't ready to open, so I promptly dealt with those. And then, of course, I had to drink more milk. On day 143, I started doing some detailing on the lower parts of the build. So this was the walls, the stairs, and making sure that everything was going to look quite good when it was done. Day 144, I did a bit of texturing on the walls. We added in some jungle wood, which were planks and logs, into the side of the mushrooms. And then on day 145, we finished the stairs to actually connect it up to the main path. A little bit of texturing later, and this was looking pretty good as well. At this point, I stood back, looked at the build, and I was very happy with what I saw. But the roof was a bit janky. To get the station completed, I was going to need some cactus because I needed to destroy the minecart. So I grabbed Dave, went for a ride, and we set off in search of a desert. I hadn't brought a bed with me, however, so I stopped off at the mob farm on the way for a quick kip. Day 147, we were on the ocean, and on day 148, we were still on the ocean. And we spotted some very odd terrain, but it looked pretty cool at the same time. We ran out of ocean, so we went onto land, carried on exploring, still with no joy, but we did come across another Enderman, beat him to death, and took his ender pearls. The surrounding area did appear to be burning, however, so we kept on moving. We then came across the village, but I was so distracted I fell down a hole. We were lucky there, that could have been a lot deeper. We then went back to the ocean and spent all of day 150 going through rivers, which are absolutely amazing to row down now that they're wider. As the sun went down, we made it back out onto open ocean, and day 151, we were once again still boating, and we'd somehow looped back round, and we were back at our mob farm. We took the opportunity to sleep, and then next day we set off in the opposite direction, still looking for a desert. It had been 5 days now, and I'm starting to get a little bit frustrated with not being able to find one. Maybe getting wings wouldn't be such a bad idea. We came across a drowned temple and quickly looted that, where we found not 1, not 2, but 3 fishing rods, which we would combine to make a fairly decent one. Further exploration led us that evening to an awesome jungle biome. Now, this jungle was absolutely massive, but this area in particular just looked beautiful, and the closer I got, the better it looked. Day 153, we were back on land, but we were definitely in some warmer biomes, so my hopes were rising. And eventually on day 154, we came across a mesa with a tiny desert next to it, and we managed to get our cactus. And now we had the long journey home. I was completely lost. So we spent day 155 travelling across the ocean and across the lands, and eventually we finally made it back to our house, and we did have our cactus so we could make our station. So the next day, that's exactly what we did. I did a little bit of redstone that basically meant as you arrived at the station, you'd get thrown out of the cart, so the cart would get destroyed on a cactus and then delivered back to the dispenser at the top. My next issue, however, was that I didn't have enough iron or gold to make any more rails. So on day 158, I did a little bit of mining. I managed to get over a stack of iron ore, and I also picked up over a stack of coal ore while I was at it. So I quickly fortuned that, got a bunch of iron, but I still didn't have much gold, so I went deeper back into my original mine. Shortly after starting, however, I broke through into a mine shaft, so I explored that, I killed some mobs, I blew some stuff up, and I managed to get a decent amount of gold. I then jumped on Dave, rode back to base, and chucked everything in a furnace. This enabled me to make some more rail, which I promptly got onto the bridge, and then, of course, I took the minecart for a test drive so far. And I was having a whale of a time. Everything was looking pretty good, and it seemed to be working and powered just enough. On day 162, however, I needed a bit of a break from all the rail cart stuff, so I hopped in my boat and I went to a nearby beach to collect lots and lots of sand. We were going to need it for a future project. I collected sand all day, and then eventually my shovel broke, which was a bit disappointing. I should have been paying attention. So I promptly left with nothing else to do and went past an island kind of thing, just absolutely rammed full of bees. I was definitely going to come back here in future. Strangely enough, I then spent the next day pretty much just at the mob farm. I made myself a new shovel to replace the one I'd just broken. I then went back home, cooked up lots and lots of glass, and on day 164, we were ready to start the next project, which was going to be a villager breeder. So we headed down to the main village, we started building up the platform, and I didn't have enough glass on these. So I went back home, I got more glass. Once that was all cooked up, I proudly rode Dave back down the hill, glass in hand, ready to build the rest of the breeder. It didn't take too long to get set up. It was actually Logical Geek Boy's farm, so I pretty much just followed a tutorial, and then once I got the villager collection system in, I realised I didn't have any beds, so it was time for a murder spree. I also needed a couple of extra villagers, so I went and exploited the villagers for a while after feeding them so I could wait for some babies to arrive, and when they did in the pouring rain, they seemed very happy about the situation, but they clearly didn't realise they were about to get locked in a glass cage. I used the bed trick once again that evening to get them into their new home, and then I stole their beds, blocked it up, and went and chopped some more wood while they grew up. I continued to exploit their parents for another day or two, hoping that they'd eventually grow up, and when they did, I turned one into a potato farmer and just watched him until he actually started getting on with his work. With the breeder up and running, although I did need to AFK there a bit to actually get some babies, I went back, I healed my tools, and decided it was time to make a whole bunch of TNT with the leftover sand, and of course the gunpowder from the mob farm. We then went into the nether, dug some tunnels, found a bit of ancient debris while we were doing so, and then caused many explosions. This was not very good for us though. We used over a stack of TNT, didn't get a single piece of ancient debris. So I went and dug another tunnel. I spaced out the TNT a little bit further as we were running low. Managed to get a few bits of ancient debris, but overall it was just not very good. We just didn't get anywhere near enough. So we went back to the overworld. I went back to the sand beach, and keeping an eye very closely on the durability of my shovel, I got lots and lots more sand. Then I went to the mob farm to get more gunpowder. While I was there, however, I noticed I wasn't getting much gunpowder, and it was at this point I realised I didn't have looting on my sword. So I stayed there longer than expected, got looting sorted, and eventually got enough gunpowder to make a few more stacks of TNT. Before I went back to the nether, however, I did upgrade both of my pickaxes into netherite to make use of the 2 ingots I did have, knowing that I was going to be doing lots of tunneling down there. On day 173, we carried on from where we left off. We blew up the rest of that tunnel, didn't find anything good, and started on some new tunnels. We had a little bit of trouble with the locals. We got attacked by a skeleton, which we swiftly dealt with, had a bit of a run-in with a hog, and I completely forgot how hard they can hit. So I kept backing up until I eventually murderized him. I carried on searching for netherite for the next day or two. I blew up lots and lots of tunnels, and we just really were not having that much luck. I managed to get enough netherite to convert my armor, but I also came out with about 4 stacks of gold ore, so I promptly fortuned that and got lots and lots of gold ingots, and realised I could probably use this to do a bit of trading with the piglins. Before I went back to the nether, however, I did in fact upgrade all of my armor, and finally we were all shiny. We were in our lovely netherite gear, and if I held just my pickaxes, it looked like everything was netherite. But I knew full well my tools still needed some love. So I went to the nether, trapped a couple of piglins, did some trading, and eventually we did manage to get the last ender pearl we needed. In fact, I got a couple of extras as well. I then went back to the mob farm just to mend my tools, and knew that I kind of wanted some slow falling potions as well. And being in the nether, I was like, well, I haven't slept for a couple of days, so I stayed up all night and not a single phantom showed up. Knowing I was probably going to need to be up for a couple of days, I decided to take this opportunity to go back to the village. This would keep the area loaded, meaning my breeder could start doing its thing, and it also meant I could continue to exploit the villagers and stack up even more emeralds for when we were ready to make our villager trading hall. I then stood on a roof of the building and stared up at the night sky. It was very uneventful, until it wasn't. After dealing with the aerial invaders, I had 2 phantom membrane, and this was more than what I needed. I just needed the 1 to make myself a few slow falling potions. Alongside making a stack or 2 of golden carrots and grabbing a few blocks and sorting out a couple of other bits, making an ender chest, we were ready to go and defeat the dragon, because I wanted to go to the end, primarily to get some shulker boxes, because I was sick and tired of running backwards and forwards all the time, moving stuff around. So on the evening of day 178, we went back to the stronghold we found in the first 100 days, put in the last 3 eyes we required, and then we jumped in. Luckily, our platform was in the middle of the island, so we dug our way out, we drank a potion, and then we used our excellent archery skills to take out the end crystals. Eventually we did find the sweet spot and we actually took out the end crystals, and then we were ready to defeat the dragon. We've all done this many times before. I wasn't too concerned at this point, especially with my decent armor and of course my slow falling potion. So we took a few shots, we went in for some closer kills, we got smacked about a couple of times, but all in all, fairly uneventful, killed the dragon, and then we managed to get all the sweet XP. With the dragon defeated, we pillared up to the warp portal that had spawned in, made ourselves a trapdoor and nipped on through. When we got to the other side, we were on a small floating island, but as stuff rendered in, I noticed there were 2 cities very close nearby. The further one away did actually have a ship, so we went there first and we grabbed the elytra. This just meant that when we were actually raiding the end, we were less likely to die. So we went on a bit of a rampage, we killed some shulkers, and then this happens. Down to 2 hearts and panicking, I quickly ate my golden apple as soon as I had a chance, and I also drank an instant healing potion. I really didn't want to be taking any chances and dying here. That would have been a bit embarrassing. We cleared out the rest of the city, made another trapdoor, jumped back through the warp portal, and then completed the game. When we got back to the overworld, it turned out we were actually back at world spawn, as opposed to at our bed, which just goes to show that I destroyed my last bed that I'd used. I decided to take this opportunity to use my wings, because I didn't actually really want them just yet. I was going to use them to get home here and actually just find my bearings around my base, take in a bit of an aerial view. But the plan was to try not to use my wings for at least another 200 or 300 days, unless we were going on a very long journey. I didn't want to use them for getting around my base, I wanted to build up some infrastructure, and if I had wings, I just wasn't going to do that. So, after taking a look around my base, realising how far away some of the things actually were, after thinking they were closer, I then returned home and I hung up my wings. We would retrieve them later on. I then went to the attic and I made a little podium, very, very stylish as you can see, just for the dragon egg, and then I made a bunch of shulkers and chucked them into my ender chest because I knew that they were going to come in very handy in future. After all the stress of the end and nearly dying in an end city, all I wanted to do was get back to work on the rail cart. So I went to the station, hopped in a minecart, got to the end of the track and just carried on building. This took a couple more days, but I did run out of gold once again, and I had actually spotted a mesa on my recent flyover, so I quickly grabbed my wings, went over to the mesa that wasn't too far away, but far enough to use my wings, grabbed lots of gold, and then returned home. On the way back, I checked on my villagers, they seemed to be working well, I went to the mob farm to repair my tools, and then went home to cook up all of the gold. I still needed lots of wood to get the track finished as well, because I'd been selling most of it to villagers, so I went back to the village once again to let my farmer grow up and do his thing, and eventually we were going to get some babies. So I chopped down some trees, did a little bit of trading, and then I went to go make a cup of tea. At this stage, I hadn't actually remembered to pause or disconnect from the game, but luckily I was in a safe space, but I did waste the entire day. On day 190, my day timer said it was day 189, which was incorrect. So I chopped down some trees, I stared at my farmer for a little while, and I could see he was slowly filling up his field, and then went back to chopping trees, at which point it flicked over to day 190. With all the extra wood in hand and enough track to get the rest of the rail cart finished, I spent the next couple of days finishing up this project, at least superficially, and then I took it for a test ride. This was a lot of fun. It also goes on for quite a while, so I'm going to speed up the footage here. Overall, it takes about a minute to get back down to the bottom, but that meant I could just chill for a minute every time I wanted to go down, so I was much happier with that. It did still need a bit of love, though. I then went to check on the breeder, and finally we had our first baby. So you never guess what I did next. I chopped down some trees and I exploited their parents. By this stage we had quite a lot of emeralds, so I went back to the breeder just in time to see our baby grow up. And that meant it was time to get on with the next project. So we took the minecart back to our base, and on day 195 we scouted out areas where we could build a small iron farm. I found a decent spot on a mountain near the edge of our area, promptly did a little bit of clearing, and then got to work building the farm itself. It didn't take too long, a couple of days, and we were ready to go. I then installed a path just to make sure we'd be able to get the villagers up there easily enough. It was now time to kidnap some villagers and trap them in a glass box forever scared. So I went back down to the village, I got my first villager out that had grown up, used the workstation trick to trick him into a boat, and then got him to the minecart track. I then used a bed to get him up next to the track, got him in a minecart, and sent him on his merry way. And together, we rode back to the base. As I arrived, however, the villager was in a massive panic because there was a zombie trying to eat his face, so I promptly dealt with that situation, and then used the bed trick once again to get the villager into its forever home. On day 199, my day counter once again said it was day 198. It was playing catch up for most of the time here. But we did manage to get another villager up to the main base. However, what with it being daytime, I just trapped him in a boat and then went back down to clear up all the mess I'd left behind on getting him there in the first place. When the sun fell, I once again used the bed trick to get a villager where he needed to be. But now it was time to go find a zombie. Conveniently enough, I found one right at the bottom of the staircase I'd just built to actually get a zombie into the farm, so I promptly name tagged him, ran up the top there, and lured him into a small box where he was going to spend the rest of his days. That night, I removed the mess around the iron farm, threw some bread at the villagers because we still needed one more in there before we could actually open the farm properly, and then it was day 200. So on our last day, I could have got a third villager up there instead of waiting for the baby. I could have even put the lava in the iron farm, so when it did start spawning golems, they'd actually die. But no, instead I decided to walk around my land, survey what we'd built, and just generally take in everything we'd achieved, very surprised about the fact I was still alive. As the day went on, I climbed to the highest point in my area, looked down on my base, and that is how we survived 200 days in Minecraft. The journey, however, was far from over.